Now let's look at URLs, how to format them so they work well in the search engines. URL means Uniform Resource Locator. It's a web address, the location of a web page. It contains the site's domain name, along with other identifying information, such as the page's file name and the directory path through the folders or directories. Here's an example. In this case, you can see the domain name, oracle.com, and in fact a subdomain, docs. Over here we see the file name, definition.html. Where is that file? It's in the URLs folder or directory, which is inside the networking folder, which is inside the tutorial folder, which is inside the Java SE folder. Now, URLs are very important from an SEO perspective. There's not much room in a URL. So if a search engine sees keywords in the URL, it's reasonable for the search engine to think that the URL has something to do with those keywords. Let's look at an example. If a search engine saw this URL, it would be reasonable for the search engine to assume that the page is about baseball. In fact, that it's somehow related to baseball scores, and more specifically, it's related to the LA Dodgers. It's not about dental surgery. It's not about mortgages. It's not about movie times. It's about baseball. So we want to include keywords in our URLs in both file names and folder names. The folder name shopping, for instance, isn't very helpful. Why not use a more specific term, such as buy widgets? So here are a few basic rules for working with URLs. First, separate keywords. Don't run them together. We want to make it easy for the search engines to see the individual keywords. When you separate, don't use spaces and don't use underscores. Instead, use hyphens, dashes. Why not underscores? Because Google for a long time saw the underscore as just another character, not a separator. A while back, Google talked about changing this behavior, but it's unclear whether they ever did. So, as there's no good reason to use underscores anyway, you might as well use hyphens to be safe. Years ago, a lot of developers were wedded to the idea of using underscores, though these days nobody cares so much. But if you do run into a holdover who says you should be using underscores, you can tell them that Google recommends dashes. And don't try to be too clever and jam dozens of keywords into your URLs. Just a smattering is fine. Overload it and it will look to the search engines like you're spamming them and won't help you anyway. What about long, complex URLs like this? This is what's often known as a dynamic URL. It's created by some kind of content management system that is pulling data out of a database. It's very unhelpful from an SEO perspective. As you can see, there are no keywords in here. The fix for this is something called URL rewriting. It's a technical issue that I won't go into here, as it's not the sort of thing the average person undertaking an SEO campaign will do. It's something that a developer would do for you, or perhaps there's some kind of plugin your content management system can work with to do it for you. Rewriting simply converts these complicated database query URLs into something friendlier, with keywords in them, of course. You can find more information by Googling the term URL rewriting. Do you need a file extension? The piece at the end, .html, .htm, .asp, and so on, is the file extension. These days, many URLs do not include file extensions because various blogging systems don't provide them by default. The problem is that then the URL looks like a folder name rather than a full file name. Does this matter? Probably not, or not a lot anyway. However, Google does look at the directory structure of a site to gain information about the site, and if every URL looks like a folder name, then it's hard for Google to understand the structure. As I said, it probably doesn't matter much, especially as it's so common these days to drop the file extension. But personally, I do prefer to have the extension there if possible, and many systems do allow you to use extensions, even if the default is to omit them. So, that's essentially it for the URL. Include keywords, even in folder names. Separate keywords with dashes, not underscores, and never spaces. And use URL rewriting if your system is spewing out complicated database query URLs. At this point, you might want to think a little about your URLs. If you already have a URL structure, you might want to take a look and see how it can be changed. For instance, if you have a product folder in the URL path, can you change the name to something more appropriate? If you sell rabbit hutches, then instead of product, use rabbit-hutches perhaps. The same, of course, goes for subfolders, product category and subcategory folders, for instance, and of course the file name, which can perhaps be the product name. You'll also have to decide if you're going to need URL rewriting, and if so, how that's going to get done.